Welcome to the latest edition of Middle East Now. I'm Nicole Zedek, and here are our headlines of the hour. Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar is dead, leading to new hope that a hostage release deal and ceasefire in Gaza can finally happen. We'll discuss the chances of any deal happening at this critical moment. In northern Israel, nearly 200 rockets have been launched from Lebanon today, as the IDF pushes forward with its ground campaign against Hezbollah. We'll have a live report from the field. Plus, Israel is still prepping its response to Iran's ballistic missile attack, even as leaks of their preparations were posted on Telegram. The Israeli cabinet is set to meet this hour, and our correspondent is on the ground with the latest. There's a new glimpse into the exact moments Yahya Sinwar fled to his underground bunker mere hours before the October 7th attack on Israel, which he orchestrated. The IDF released this never-before-seen footage to show how the Hamas leader prioritized his own survival rather than the needs of Gazan civilians. Our Jody Notelevitz has the report.
A man rushes quickly through a dark tunnel system, followed closely behind by a woman and children. For hours moving back and forth through the tunnel, carrying various supplies needed for a long stay, including mattresses, water bottles, pillows, food, and even a plasma television. CCTV captured the moment, dated October 6, 2023, the night before Hamas would launch the deadliest assault on Jews since the Holocaust. The man in the footage? The now slain Yahya Sinwar, known as the architect of the October 7th attack on Israel. The video, apparently recovered several months ago, was released by the IDF amid attempts by some Hamas supporters to portray the footage of Sinwar throwing a stick at a surveillance drone in his dying moments as evidence of a brave leader who fought to the very end.
Even on the evening before the brutal massacre, Sinwar was preoccupied with his survival and that of his family, building his escape route.
He was doing that all night alone with his family in order to keep his position classified. It was all happening in Khan Yunis.
According to IDF intelligence, since October 7th, Sinwar spent most of his time in Gaza's underground tunnel systems, believed to be a total length of about 700 kilometers, emerging only to escape, accompanied by bodyguards and with documents, certificates, weapons, and money. For the first few weeks, Sinwar hid in Gaza City in a compound under Shifa Hospital. Hagari added that in February, the IDF reached the underground fortress Sinwar had built in Khan Yunis, but he had fled shortly before, leaving behind millions of shekels in cash. By August, more intelligence footage and circumstantial evidence collected suggested that Sinwar could be in the Tel Sultan neighborhood of Rafah. Intelligence officers observed people walking around with their faces covered, sometimes accompanied by guards. They believed they might have been senior Hamas figures or abductees. On August 27th, Israeli hostage Farhan Qadi was located in the area. On August 31st, the bodies of 6 murdered hostages were recovered from a tunnel in the same area.
IDF operations in Khan Yunis forced Sinwar to flee to Rafah. Last month, Sinwar's DNA was found on a piece of tissue he used, a few hundred meters from a tunnel where 6 Israeli hostages were brutally executed in Tel Sultan in Rafah. Then, Sinwar fled yet again.
At the end of September, a letter to the Hamas leaders in Qatar from Gaza said that they were committed to the ceasefire and hostage deal made in July, this appearing to be Sinwar's final message to his men prior to his assassination. It is not clear why Sinwar came above ground, but according to intelligence sources, he may have realized he was being sought underground and chose to hide in one of Tel Sultan's many identical buildings instead. The IDF had also been conducting more ambushes in tunnels in the Rafah region in recent weeks, even injecting them with gas, making breathing impossible. Based on all the data gathered by Israeli and American intelligence agencies, Sinwar led Hamas for at least the first 6 months of the war while staying underground with his family, and that IDF troops came close to him several times, but always arriving shortly after he managed to escape.
Killing Sinwar is the result of a year of operational and intelligence efforts to bring him and other Hamas leaders to justice.
Well, for more discussion, I'm joined now in studio by former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press, Dan Perry. Thanks for being with us as always. Now, when it comes to Sinwar, we see the details here of this year-long manhunt that every time the IDF got close to him, whether it was underground or above ground, he was just a mere days away, it seemed. Yet when they finally caught him, he was above ground, despite hiding out in these tunnels for at least 6 months and likely longer than that, both above and below ground. And so what does this really say about the operations inside Gaza right now that forced Sinwar to come out from hiding and be in these houses above ground?
I think we always knew that eventually their supplies would run out. Eventually patience would run out. Eventually the noose would tighten and they would have to come out. It took a year and over a year. It's not like it happened very quickly. And also I think, if we're being honest, it happened randomly. I mean, they knew he was in that area, but it's not like the forces attacking that building were special forces that had him cornered. They discovered after the fact that one of the 3 or 4 terrorists killed was Sinwar. Look, it's such a tragic story, you know. I mean, Sinwar emerges, I think, as this diabolical and rather imbecilic figure who brought utter ruination upon his people. And yet, everyone who met him and interviewed him speaks of a person who was undoubtedly dark and evil, but also very intelligent and had charisma, yet potential to do something.
That's what makes you such a powerful leader.
Positive with his life. And this is what he did. Now, I think his demise is a moment of a great symbolic value, but also, practically speaking, I think it should enable all sides to move to a new phase. And I think it's interesting that in the Arab world we hear very little mourning of him. It looks like they're able to get over their agony rather easily. It's no secret that Hamas was detested by the moderate Sunni Arabs, at least. I only wish they had the courage of their convictions and were able to speak more clearly, and maybe now that he's gone, that might happen.
And you talk about exactly the room that this could leave for other developments, specifically inside Gaza. And that's really one of the many questions that remains following the wake of Sinwar's death, is what this means for Gaza and exactly how Israel and other Palestinian factions can leverage this key moment in time to finally push out Hamas. To talk about this, I'm joined now by Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, a Gazan writer, analyst, and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Ahmed, thanks for joining us. Now,
thanks so much for having me.
You have been saying, following Sinwar's elimination, that it provides Israel with several different off-ramps to start an end to the war. But I want you to elaborate that. Is there finally some room for these day-after considerations now that Sinwar is dead?
Well, I think it offers Prime Minister Netanyahu an opportunity to begin to proclaim victory. I mean, after all, Hamas is severely degraded. It is no position to mount any serious threat to Israel in the way that it did on October 7th. Most of Hamas's military and indeed political leadership within the Gaza Strip has been eliminated. The group is in disarray. They are reduced to merely disconnected, disparate splinter cells at this point. So if I were Prime Minister Netanyahu, I would in fact use this to encourage the moderate Arab Sunni states and indeed the European and international community to begin initiating serious discussions about what does the day after look like, to begin inviting professionals to come into the Gaza Strip, open it up, have them assume roles, transitory roles or transitional roles in terms of governance, in terms of addressing the humanitarian crises, and setting the cornerstones for future governance of the Gaza Strip. I think the gain, if you will, of Sinwar's assassination are going to be far more important at the tactical and operational level than at the strategic level. And what I mean by that is, I grew up in the Gaza Strip. I was there when Ahmed Yassin, Abdulaziz al-Rantisi, Ahmed Ismail Abu Shanab, and all the founders of the group were assassinated. And back then, it was seen as an existential blow, and people thought Hamas may never recover from this. But indeed, 2 decades later, Hamas actually became 5 times stronger than its founders ever envisioned. And so I wouldn't count on Sinwar's elimination, as being the fundamental blow to Hamas. I would use this as a tactical blow to the group's command and control structures. The group is in disarray in Gaza, and I would focus on that being exploited to achieve a strategic victory, because Hamas is indeed used to most of its leadership being assassinated and has trained a cadre of mid-level commanders who could assume these roles.
But is there still some fear inside Gaza for any of these governing bodies, specifically, let's say, the Palestinian Authority, which has been thrown around a lot, to possibly come into the Gaza Strip, or some other Palestinian factions as well? There has been this fear of military consequences coming from Hamas if they were to step into the Gaza Strip. Is that fear still tangible right now, or is there more room for them to come in?
Well, there certainly is. I mean, Hamas is not entirely eliminated in that there are still guys with guns holding hostages, with access to some tunnels, with access to some kinetic munitions, like an RPG, like C4 type munitions that could be used in IEDs. So that threat exists, and whoever goes in there would need to have access to lethal force and the authority to use such lethal force. But that still remains largely diminished, if you will, in that there's space for a new authority to go in there. And perhaps it starts by not directly confronting Hamas, by not remains of Hamas and other factions like the Islamic Jihad, but declaring the intent to go in there and establish a new government and establish a monopoly on force and invite what remains of Hamas's fighters and militants to lay down their arms and offer them a pathway to either amnesty or to be integrated into the new apparatus, those who do not have blood, Palestinian or Israeli blood, on their hand. So the other thing is that there needs to be creativity when it comes to, for example, the former CEO of SodaStream offering a serious financial reward to those who come forward with information and delivering alive Israeli hostages. There needs to be space for track 2 or track 1.5 niche type initiatives to exploit the momentary benefit, if you will, or gains of Sinwar's elimination, to get Gazans to actually take matters into their own hand, to get the remnants of Hamas, offer them a pathway to safety. It's widely believed that there are many in Gaza, in Hamas, who wanted the end of the war, who were upset with Sinwar and the direction he was taking everybody. And so with his elimination, there may be an opportunity for the moderate elements of Hamas to step forward and either release the hostages or announce their intention to stand down. The leadership in Qatar and Turkey and Lebanon will never do such a thing, as we've seen with the declaration by Khalil al-Hayya, the deputy commander, political commander of Hamas. So we need to exploit the moment, either by directly engaging what remains of Hamas in Gaza, by the Israeli government announcing steps that could incentivize moderate Arab Sunni countries and the international community, and even the Palestinian Authority. It doesn't mean the PA marches in and takes over overnight. It's going to be a multi-year process. We need to seize the moment.
And this is a critical moment at that, it seems. Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, thank you for giving us your insight into that.
Thank you.
I want to come back here in studio and Dan Perry, hear your thoughts, because we continue to talk about the day after, but it seems with this major development, there could finally be this room and this conversation that has been needing to happen for months now.
Absolutely. One of the impediments from Israel's side to doing the hostage deal that so many have been calling for 2, 3, 4, 5 months ago was the understanding that the deal as constituted really basically means getting back the hostages in exchange for an end to the war, at which point, even though Gaza is in the state of ruin, Sinwar would be marching around amid the ruins declaring victory, and Israel didn't want to give him that because narratives have a great importance in a human experience, and maybe especially in the culture of the wider Middle East, and they weren't prepared for that. That's no longer going to happen. So at least one impediment is gone. There are many other impediments. During the interview just now, you mentioned one of them, which is fear, that whatever other entity goes in will still face violence from what remains of Hamas. That's certainly true. And there are ways to mitigate that by offering them amnesty or integration or exile or killing the rest of them, or accepting that you're going to deal with an insurgency for a time. Another impediment is the narrative impediment. It is unfortunate, and I think it's still possible to use this moment. It's unfortunate that no one in the Arab world has yet said Hamas brought catastrophe. They were wrong, and now something else needs to happen that will be right. If that should happen, if we will start hearing that from Egypt, from Saudi Arabia, from the UAE, maybe even from Qatar, that will create the kind of legitimacy that would be extremely helpful at this point in aid of a day-after scenario. The last impediment is the Israeli government that has a built-in roadblock in the form of the right-wing, the far-right elements in it that want to occupy Gaza and settle it with Jews. Now, Netanyahu says Israel doesn't want that. Meanwhile, this week or next, a third of his Knesset members are holding a conference aimed at promoting that. And of course, that third of the Likud controls the future of the coalition, because the coalition has 68, I guess now, out of 120. So Israel's got to decide what it wants to do when it grows up. Does it really want to go back to Gaza, reoccupy Gaza, reintegrate 2.5 million Palestinians that now many of them have a good reason to hate it, back into some kind of single entity that's not that democratic, because Palestinians can't vote, and that's under military occupation? Obviously, I feel this is lunacy. And so the right thing to do is to figure out the optimal moment where to declare victory and to move to a day-after phase.
Well, and you mentioned some of the reactions or lack of reactions that we're seeing coming out of the Arab world. We have heard so many reactions following Sinwar's death when it does come from Western leaders, from Iran, even from Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, who sent his condolences for the terror leader's killing. But very notably, there have been few words from Arab countries in the region. Well, for more on this, we're joined by writer and political commentator Dr. Nasir Al-Omari. Dr. Nasir, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what are the reactions right now from Qatar, where Hamas leaders outside of Gaza, this is where they reside? We have heard very little from them, along with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, other countries in the region. They've all been pretty quiet following this major development.
Yes, the Arab League, represented by Egypt and the Gulf countries, continue to repeat that they reject the Israeli actions in Gaza, in Lebanon. They view them as aggression. However, I think there is another narrative in the Gulf countries, in Jordan, at least when it comes to the regimes and heads of these regimes. I think for the first time, they view curtailing Iran's influence and expansionism in the Middle East positively. And I believe they view this as an opening to having peace. However, the Arab street is divided. It's mostly pro-Palestinian, and you are not going to have the Arab League come out and condemn Sinwar or even Hassan Nasrallah. They will continue to condemn Israel until Israel changes the situation strategically, as it has been doing. So I believe the Arab League is celebrating, and the Arab regimes are celebrating the success that Israel has had against Sinwar and against Hassan Nasrallah. However, the Arab street is emotional. They are anti-Israeli, and these regimes have to continue to condemn Israel publicly, at least.
Dr. Al-Omari, my guest here, Dan Perry in studio, has a quick question for you as well.
Yeah, as regards the Arab street, I know it's divided. I spent many years in the Arab world. I wonder if you think there's any way to get them to, despite the emotions and despite the narratives, to get them to accept what I believe is reality, which is that Hamas has been fighting for 35 years to prevent a Palestinian state and a two-state solution, and therefore, if you are pro-Palestinian, you should be anti-Hamas. If you want a two-state solution, you should be mourning what the war that Hamas launched on October 7th. In other words, what I believe to be, and please forgive me, an infantile equating of Hamas and the Palestinian cause. Is there any way to break it?
Yes, I believe the narrative has started to sink in, and there are a lot of people who are saying, you know what, this jihadist approach to Israel has actually destroyed Gaza, is now destroying Lebanon. They blame Hassan Nasrallah for in Lebanon, the opposition, even probably within his own, population. They blame him for displacing them. So this narrative is sinking in. However, you have forces like Al Jazeera, the Muslim Brotherhood, Iran, who continue to say this is part of the struggle. And no matter, how tough it gets, Israel is paying a price. In the long run, we will alter this situation and we will eventually win if we just can be patient. This is the narrative that is being pushed by Al Jazeera, by Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood. Unfortunately, it's destructive. It's not grounded in any reality. There is no success. Yet they continue to, many people in the Arab world continue to stick to this Iranian jihadist vision, that they use to defeat Israel ultimately.
There certainly is a narrative shift that needs to happen here in the region. Dr. Nasia Al-Omari, thank you for giving us your insight into what we're hearing or not really hearing right now at this point.
Thank you.
Now, there's some interesting developments happening right now revolving around the Saudi-owned news network NBC. A reporter for the station called a number of Hamas and Hezbollah leaders terrorists, causing an uproar at their offices in Iraq, with Iraqi militias and protesters storming the offices, destroying the building, and setting fire to part of it. Rama Siegel has the story.
Violence erupted in Iraq's capital, Baghdad, on Saturday. 400 to 500 protesters stormed the offices of Saudi-owned TV channel NBC, ransacking and setting fire to part of the office after the broadcaster aired a report calling leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah, quote, terrorists. The report was on terrorists who had been killed in this century, naming former al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, Hamas leaders Ismail Haniyeh and Yahya Sinwar, and Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah.
Yesterday we heard bullets hitting, fire, and we didn't know what was going on, so we came out to see what was happening, and we saw NBC burn down. I believe because they spoke about the leaders in those things.
In the hours after the protest, Iraq's Media and Communications Commission said it would take steps to revoke the license of NBC, halting it from operating in Iraq, saying that the network violated the country's broadcasting regulations through, quote, attack on martyrs, leaders of victory, and heroic resistance leaders. While militias in Iraq are calling for the permanent closure of NBC, Saudi Arabia says it is investigating the network as it, quote, violated the kingdom's media regulations and policies. The journalists who worked on the report, as well as the editors, have all been suspended.
Well, to unpack this more, I'm joined in studio now by our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran. Ariel, this news coming out, the Saudi Council for Media, it has suspended this journalist, stating that it does not align with their views. But is that really what's happening right here? What exactly, or how exactly was this report allowed to air in the first place if it does not align with views?
Look, I don't know if this specific report rose to the highest levels of the Saudi kingdom, but just as almost everything that is aired on Al Jazeera has the blessing of the Emir of Qatar, same thing with the Saudi public broadcaster has the blessing of the top leadership, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and King Salman. I doubt, I would presume it's more the former rather than the latter. I think this is one of those things where they thought this could fly under the radar. This does illustrate where Saudi Arabia stands in terms of its position regarding these terror elements. Now, it didn't have only Sinwar. It had Nasrallah, it had Qasem Soleimani, it had Saleh al-Aghouri. I mean, it really got into the Iranian axis currently, but also went back, Al-Qaeda, bin Laden, and the likes of that. I think the Saudi public broadcaster took a bad gamble. Like they didn't read the room. You don't come out with someone like that in this current, unfortunately, in this current public atmosphere in the Middle East. I think they should be surprised of this reaction following what we saw when Qatar hosted the World Cup 2 years ago. You could see that the sentiment in the street, in the Arab street, is totally pro-Palestinian. Especially those who are vocal. Now, these elements in Iraq that did storm the
offices. They are pro-Iranian elements, they're supporters of the Iranian axis, so they probably came. I doubt this was a spontaneous protest, so to speak. But at the end of the day, I think the Saudi public broadcaster took a gamble that they weren't aware of the repercussions. It does indicate that their sentiment is in support of Israel, willing to go for normalization, but it would appear that the public sentiment in the street is not yet ready there.
This could be some major ramifications, or telling if what you're saying, that the Saudi principles do align with Israel. Dan, I want your thoughts when it comes to this very interesting story.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, for years when I was at AP, we dealt with the question of what to call a terrorist, and there's this pretense among the people that argue one side or the other. This is about journalistic accuracy. It isn't. It's about politics. And when you call someone a terrorist, it's not a question of functionality of what they've done or their job description. It basically says we disagree with their cause, really, because think about it. No one ever said, well, we like that terrorist. That sentence has never been said. So when you are willing to come out and say these are terrorists, what it implies is we don't agree with what they're doing. Not just their methods, their purpose. And of course, as Ariel said, Saudi Arabia indeed is against the jihadist axis of resistance/evil. And was it a mistake by some local reporter or whatever? Did they gamble and lose? I don't know. Ariel may be right. But I prefer to see it as a reflection of where the heart of the leadership of Saudi Arabia really is. And that is promising. Now, as I said before, I only wish they had the courage to take it all away and to come out in public and to promote a narrative that says, people, this is horrifically bad. Look at what happened to Gaza. Time to move towards peace.
It shows the bigger narrative. 20 seconds.
Yeah, no, two things. One, this is a report that you would expect to see on an Israeli public broadcaster, not Saudi public broadcaster. But I do think it's telling, amid these diplomatic efforts, contacts between Saudi Arabia and Iran, I think it's reports like this on the public broadcaster that show really the sentiment among the top leadership, as opposed to the diplomacy.
Much more right here. Lots more to unpack, but we do have to go out for a quick break. We'll be right back on Middle East Now.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
רוצים אותם חיים! חיים!
Welcome back to Middle East Now. It has been another active day in northern Israel, with Hezbollah firing nearly 200 rockets from Lebanon throughout the day. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran breaks down the latest developments between Israel and Hezbollah.
Non-stop sirens blared across northern Israel throughout Sunday. Hezbollah launched more than 100 rockets, including drones, at communities and military posts as the Lebanese terror group continues to expand its range of fire. There were no direct injuries from the attacks, but numerous wildfires spread around the communities.
We are in a daily war. This reality has been going for a year, but over the past week, we have seen the barrages intensify. The front line is expanding further south and now includes Acre.
Meanwhile, the IDF continued striking dozens of Hezbollah sites and operatives across Lebanon. The Air Force is back striking in the capital, with the IDF saying it hit a command center of Hezbollah's intelligence headquarters and an underground weapons workshop. Visiting troops on the northern border, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Hezbollah's frontline fortifications are crumbling.
We are shifting from a situation of defeating the enemy in all the frontline villages to a situation of destruction, blowing up its tunnels and ammunition depots. We are dismantling Hezbollah. The results are very clear in the places where Hezbollah waited and prepared itself in order to raid into the border settlements. There are now IDF soldiers.
Hezbollah's deputy chief and de facto leader, Naim Qassem, has reportedly fled Lebanon 2 weeks ago, fearing an Israeli assassination. An Emirati news site cited an Iranian source saying Qassem fled to Tehran alongside Iran's foreign minister following his visit to Lebanon earlier this month. Meanwhile, the United States reportedly conveyed to Tehran via Iraqi mediators a message calling for calm in the Middle East and to stop supporting tensions in Lebanon.
There's an opportunity, in my view, and my colleagues agree, that we can probably deal with Israel and Iran in a way that ends the conflict for a while.
Say that again?
It ends the conflict. In other words, it stops the back and forth. We think that there's a possibility of working for a ceasefire in Lebanon.
To that end, U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein will arrive in Lebanon on Monday for another go at diplomacy, hoping that with Nasrallah out of the way, Lebanon can agree to a settlement that Hezbollah previously blocked.
Let's go straight to the field now for an update on what's happening on the ground. Our correspondent Robert Swift joins us live from northern Israel. Robert, what are you seeing? What are you hearing as far as these latest developments happening between Israel and Hezbollah right now?
So it's mostly a continuation of the cross-border fire that we've been seeing throughout the day. Just as I've been standing here waiting to go live with you, we've seen yet another attack taking place. A small one this time, the community of Odea, just to the east of Kiryat Shmona. There was a siren there, and subsequently an Iron Dome missile was fired, which you can see here from the streets of Kiryat Shmona. Now, that's one of about 22 different attacks that have taken place across the border today. The one previous to that, half an hour ago, a larger scale barrage against the town of Kiryat Shmona, but by no means the only attacks taking place. Like I say, 22 different attacks. Some of them, I would say about 4 of those attacks have been larger scale barrages, including 2 against Haifa earlier today. But many of them are more low key. They're attritional attacks, pestering, harassing Israeli defences, like the one we just saw a couple of minutes ago. We don't have confirmation yet on whether that was a rocket or a drone, but like I say, a small-scale attack. In other instances, we've seen Hezbollah today making more use of drones. They do appear in recent days and weeks to be leaning more towards that tactic due to success they've seen there. And there was a string this afternoon of 3 different incidents involving drones. So that does appear to be showing the way that Hezbollah are adjusting their artillery and their more long-range attacks. When it comes to the combat inside South Lebanon, that appears to be grinding on as before. A source I have living in one of the communities on the Israel-Lebanese border has been keeping me updated with the small arms fire and tank fire that's taking place there. And it sounds like that combat is as heavy now as it has been in many of the previous days.
Robert, you just mentioned what's happening there along the border, the southern Lebanese border, but we're also seeing these reports and these images of renewed strikes after some lull in the strikes in the capital of Beirut. What information do we have about the IDF's activity in Beirut as well?
That's right. So there have been pauses where the IDF have had several days where they haven't struck inside in Beirut. But as Ariel said in his report, any such lull there has gone now. The IDF attempting to target more high-level targets inside there. They'll be attempted to hit targets that they feel can have a more strategic effect, have a larger effect on the course of this war, other than the sorts of targets that are closer here to the border, which are more low-level impact.
Robert Swift, that update from northern Israel. Thanks so much for your coverage on the ground. Now, Saturday morning, just yesterday, Hezbollah directly targeted Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's house in Caesarea, launching a drone attack from Lebanon. Neither Netanyahu or his wife Sarah were home during the attack, and no one was injured. But the IDF confirms a building in the area was hit, although they don't specify if it was part of Netanyahu's residence or not. Our senior correspondent, Bianca Zanini, has more.
Israeli politicians are warning that Iran will pay a price for Saturday's drone attack launched from Lebanon, which targeted the home of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The attack comes as Israel celebrates the eliminations of the top leaders of the Iranian-backed Hamas and Hezbollah in recent months.
Well, 2 days ago, we took out Sinwar, the terrorist mastermind whose goons beheaded our men, raped our women, burnt babies alive. We took him out, and we're continuing our battle with Iran's other terrorist proxies. We're going to win this war.
So will something deter you?
No.
Throughout Saturday, the Iranian-backed Hezbollah group in Lebanon fired over 200 projectiles into Israel, including 3 drones, of which one appears to have hit the premier's home in the coastal town of Caesarea. Although the Prime Minister's office called the incident an assassination attempt, they've not confirmed which building was hit. Netanyahu and his wife were not in the vicinity during the attack, and there were no casualties reported. Netanyahu posted on X, warning Hezbollah and Iran.
The attempt by Iran's proxy Hezbollah to assassinate me and my wife today was a grave mistake. This will not deter me or the state of Israel from continuing our just war against our enemies in order to secure our future. I say to Iran and its proxies in its axis of evil, anyone who tries to harm Israel's citizens will pay a heavy price.
Like Israel, Iran blames Hezbollah for the attack, but the Lebanon-based terror group has not claimed responsibility.
Still with me here in studio is Dan Perry. Dan, right now the IDF continuing with these operations inside southern Lebanon, inside the capital Beirut as well. Some people are wondering how Sinwar's death could leave room for not only negotiations in Gaza, but negotiations in the north as well. Could Hezbollah be looking at all of these constant Israeli wins and be more willing to negotiate some sort of a halt in hostilities?
Well, it depends if they're willing to negotiate to the point of creating a reasonable day-after situation in Lebanon, which I kind of doubt. Look, you have to know how to tell your story. One of the problems Israel has had in Gaza is that everyone can understand they want to get rid of Hamas and get back the hostages. But no one knows what Israel wants afterwards because the Israeli government is engineered to not enable that. So that's a problem in Gaza. In Lebanon, there's no problem. Israel's story could not be more reasonable. And I'm frankly perplexed at these seemingly naive Western politicians, including Biden, implicitly a little bit, but certainly Trudeau and Macron, who speak about a ceasefire and escalations. Why should they want a ceasefire? And what are they talking about when they say escalation? I mean, how do they genuinely want an Iranian-engineered, armed, trained, and funded proxy army that is the biggest non-state army in the world to take over Lebanon, hold it hostage, and be attacking another country? Is that something they think should be allowed to continue? It's stupefying. So I would honestly think that if they can't help, they should get out of the way. Now, in the case of Biden, it's obviously different because he enables the war to continue by arming Israel and giving it backing at the United Nations. So I think Israel needs to be aligned with the U.S., but I can't believe the U.S. isn't really happy about the degradation of Hezbollah. And there's only one way this can end. With Hezbollah no longer controlling a third of Lebanon, with Lebanon controlling its own sovereignty, and anyone with a sliver of a shadow of a brain must understand that the Lebanese leadership also wants this, and you see this.
And we've heard this message coming from the Lebanese leadership actually this past week.
Interim Prime Minister Najib Mikati has been increasingly showing a little bit of courage by saying things like we shouldn't embroil ourselves in foreign conflicts, and actually talking about implementing 1701. What does that mean? Disarming Hezbollah and having the Lebanese army control the border. Now, it may be a while yet before they can, and therefore what's needed probably is some version of a multinational force. And Israel should come out and say it, because even though in recent months there's been some military successes, and I think they're clear for all the world to see, on a public diplomacy front, it's still the same rather perplexing failure to articulate what you want. And in the case of Lebanon, it's particularly odd. The failure is particularly striking because what they want is A, eminently reasonable, and B, not embroiled in any ridiculous conflict with Israel's far right. No one wants to occupy Lebanon. Everyone wants Hezbollah gone. And Israel's demands could not be more reasonable. Maybe it would help to put the likes of Macron back in their place if Israel articulated them with any level of coherence.
Let's talk about another story that's coming out of between Israel and its Western allies as well, as Israel is right now preparing for its retaliatory strike on Iran. Iran now has a heads up. There are reports of a major U.S. intelligence security breach, with American documents detailing Israel's preparations leaked in an anti-Israel Telegram account. It's raising plenty of concern in both Israel and the United States. Once again, our senior correspondent Bianca Zanini reports.
It's been 20 days since Iran launched some 200 missiles into Israel, and since Israel vowed to retaliate. Now, 2 U.S. intelligence documents on Israel's preparations for the response have been leaked online in an apparent major security breach. The American documents detail measures taken in the last week by the Israeli Air Force, including the transfer of weapons, a large exercise involving intelligence planes, and drone units intended to attack Iran. The U.S. has not commented on the alleged leak, but has also not disputed the authenticity of the documents. If true, the papers indicate the U.S. is keeping a close eye and potentially spying on its ally. On Friday, President Joe Biden confirmed that the Americans are informed of Israel's movements.
Do you have a good understanding right now what Israel is going to do in response to Iran's October 1st attacks and when they will actually respond to Iran?
Yes and yes.
Can you tell us?
No.
Iran's foreign minister tweeted with a picture of President Biden that anyone with knowledge about Israel's expected attack must be held accountable.
Due to the expansionist policies of the occupying regime, the region has turned into a powder keg, and its explosion could endanger not only the peace and security of the region, but also the entire world. The possibility of war in the region remains a serious concern, and no one in the region, except for the Zionist regime, desires this situation.
On Saturday, a drone attack launched by the Iranian proxy Hezbollah targeted Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's home in northern Israel. Washington, seeking to avoid any further escalation, has called for Israel to limit the scope of its retaliation against Iran and not to strike Iran's nuclear or oil facilities. Meanwhile, the U.S. is sending an advanced air defense battery and around 100 troops to Israel to protect the country in case of another Iranian attack.
Well, to discuss this concerning new development, I'm joined now by Behnam Ben Talblou, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Behnam, thanks for being with us this evening. Right now, we know little about some of the documents that were leaked and exactly how they were leaked. But what does this say about the possible risks of eroding this trust between the United States and Israel at such a sensitive moment?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. And that operative word here is trust, because whether it was a leak, meaning a political person or some other mid-level bureaucrat sending this out, or whether it was a hack compromising a certain server or a certain security system, it raises real operational questions about the information that the Americans and the Israelis are able to much more generally share and pass with each other, let alone about a potential retaliation for Iran's October 1st ballistic missile barrage at Israel, which, by the way, was a history-making barrage. Make no mistake about that. It's the largest ballistic missile attack single-day attack in human history. So this is no laughing matter. Unfortunately, if you look at the U.S.-Israel record in the past, at times where there may have been talk of an Israeli military attack or retaliation or something to that effect, there have been, stories often quoting unnamed U.S. persons or leaks that could not be verified that have somehow made their way into the news. So we're really seeing this third front now, the information warfare front, not be exploited between America and its partners vis-a-vis their shared adversaries, but between America and their partners.
And you're correct that this has been such an ongoing problem, specifically over the course of this war and what we're seeing right now. Do you think that this is going to impact exactly how Israel and the United States shares this intelligence?
I don't know, because I don't know the exact means or the mechanisms or the mannerisms in which, highly classified or compartmentalized information are shared with each other within a certain agency, let alone within the U.S. government system, let alone between the U.S. government and even major partners like Israel, which don't, to the best of my knowledge, have major intelligence sharing agreements, just like the Five Eyes countries do, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, for example. Nonetheless, I think it raises a big picture question as to how these two countries, the U.S. and Israel, are able to rely on one another and trust one another when they're fighting both a kinetic conflict and an informational conflict.
And Behnam, what about Iran? How will this leak possibly impact Iran's preparations? These documents, although they might not have said all of Israel's plans, they're still likely high value to Tehran when it comes to its own defense.
Certainly likely high value, but also past maybe prologue here, given the fact that many open source analysts assume that given that an air-launched ballistic missile had been used in the April Israeli retaliation to the April Iranian drone and ballistic missile and cruise missile barrage, it's likely that an air-launched ballistic missile will factor again here. So there's a thread of continuity there. And all the talk about drones potentially being used as well. That goes back to 2022, where the Iranians allege the Israelis may have used Iraqi territory to launch a drone strike against an Iranian drone base or drone storage facility. Again, the Israelis haven't confirmed the use of either of those two systems or even the existence of those two operations. But past this prologue here, and given the fact that the documents kind of correlate with that past this prologue, it does give the Iranians more room and thought to kind of prepare.
Certainly interesting to see exactly how this will all unfold in the future. Behnam Ben Taleblu, thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.
Now, right now, there's a cabinet meeting taking place at the Israeli military headquarters in Tel Aviv, where they're expected to discuss this expected Israeli retaliation response on Iran. And that's where our correspondent Zach Anders is right now, outside of those headquarters. Zach, do we have any details of what this meeting might entail and what the Israeli cabinet is expected to talk about?
No, not at this point. And really what we're getting is more of unofficial rumblings that are coming out of the Curia from what people are hearing. Not about specifically what this Security Cabinet meeting is, what's at the top of the agenda. It's assumed that it is the Iranian response, this is expected retaliatory strike on Iran. And perhaps Iran is paying attention to what is taking shape. Of course, this has been a period of high alert on both sides for the last 2 weeks since the October 1st ballistic missile attack. But every time these meetings come up and you get the entire security apparatus meeting together in one place, led by the Prime Minister, that certainly raises things, or at least perhaps in the Iranian context, has them perk up and pay attention. There's some initial reports coming out of Tehran that there's once again long lines at gas stations and that today people were pulling money out of banks. This is something we've seen over the last 2 weeks, comes in spurts, but again tonight, those more reporting on the ground from Tehran that is what's taking shape. And we don't have really any solid, credible evidence right now that's publicly available that shows what exactly this response is going to look like, other than what the Biden administration has been leaking over the last 2 weeks, that the Biden admin does not think it's going to be nuclear sites or oil refineries, that will stick to military sites. Those were leaks that came before this Hezbollah drone, supplied by Iran, hits the Prime Minister's house in the north. The Prime Minister saying that that's going to change the equation here. It's really tough to say where this night is going in particular, if it's going to be coming past like any other night that we've seen over the last 2 weeks, or if this is a final decision, because that very well could be what's taking place in the building behind me, is a final approval of plans, retaliatory strike plans that could then be carried out at any moment. But that's just speculation at this point. It's right now very tight-lipped, all of these sources surrounding the Kyria, which could be, it can't really be taken as indication of anything. This is just how the IDF has been operating over the last 2 weeks, knowing that this strike is coming, and working to preserve, through all the noise, through all the clutter, some semblance of secrecy. But we've seen that the White House in Washington, D.C. has made that more difficult, or at least that's what the IDF has been privately saying, is that these leaks and this new leak of a national security document is only complicating matters and making the plans that could be drawn up or will be drawn up even harder to implement with the amount of leaks that have taken place over the last 2 weeks.
It's definitely for the best that Israel's trying to maintain this air of mystery when it does come to their military plans. Zach Ganders reporting outside the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv. Thanks for your coverage. Now, coming back in studio, Dan, as we're talking about Israel's possible preparations, will they, won't they attack, pretty much, especially in the midst of all of these different leaks, these different reports coming out in media as well. It does endanger some of the different retaliations between Israel and Iran, and really the whole security throughout the region.
Maybe. What we've seen in the document it's not like the document actually showed what Israel is about to do exactly. It's not great. I can't tell if it was purposeful or something else, low level or mid level, probably not high level, if it was intentional. But putting all that aside, there are bigger issues here. Israel has major strategic aims with Iran, strategic aims that it can't achieve on its own, namely, to get Iran to stop filling the region with proxy armies that are more powerful than the countries that host them, and bent on attacking Israel and ending Iran's nuclear program. It would be really good to get the Americans to assist in achieving those goals, and the benefit would primarily accrue to the people of Iran, who have been oppressed by this terrible regime for 45 years. Now, Israel can't fix this all on its own, so there is an argument that maybe, even though tactically speaking, they need to do something to respond to the biggest ballistic missile attack in human history, maybe it be measured and they keep their powder relatively dry in exchange for an understanding with the Americans that the day after the election, America enters a new phase vis-a-vis Iran where they stop normalizing this insanity.
Do you think that's likely to happen?
I don't know if it's likely to happen. I'm not sure it's likely to not happen, because if things continue as they have been, they will lead to more and more mayhem in the region, and we've seen that the world is unhappy with that. And Iran will eventually get a nuclear weapon, and the world is directly threatened by that. So the big question is it more likely that Trump would do such a policy, or Harris? I'm not sure what the answer is, because even though Trump, or at least the right wing in America, has greater clarity about the danger of the jihadi chaos project and the unacceptability of the way Iran comports itself, Trump is also isolationism adjacent, and his one big idea is that he hates the forever wars and everything is transactional and America first. I'm not so sure that he's going to be eager to get involved in the potentially very dangerous and escalatory action vis-a-vis Iran. That type of neocon attitude actually most exists these days in the moderate wing of the Democratic Party headed by Biden. I don't know if Harris is in the same place, so it's complicated. But what I'm saying is there is a real account to be settled with Iran. It's not just Israel. Israel's on the vanguard of a global coalition of like-minded moderate countries, the entire West basically, or that part of the West that knows what it's looking at when it's looking at Iran, and the moderate Arab world. And so we really desperately need a strategic and focused government in Israel that doesn't have reveries about reoccupying and resettling Gaza, and instead keeps its eye on the prize, which is having Israel be in the center of a global alliance, a Western and Sunni Arab alliance, arrayed against Iran to fix this problem that needs fixing desperately. And if we put the focus elsewhere, we risk having the world's focus be elsewhere, for example, on Gaza forevermore, and Iran will go nuclear. And that is not a world that I think we want to be living in.
This is a much larger threat. It goes well beyond Israel. It goes to the entire world, and especially these Western alliances.
But it would mean that Israel right now would need to be talking to Biden and Harris and maybe even Trump to organize beneath, under the radar, a deal that they do things differently after the election.
Weeks away, so certainly a lot of developments happening not only here in Israel but in the United States, and how that could impact what's happening here in Israel. Dan Perry, your insight is always of value here. Thank you so much for joining us.
My work is done.
Now, to all of our viewers watching, that's all we have for you on this latest edition of Middle East Now. I'm Nicole Zedek. Make sure you stay with us here on I-24 News as the Rundown with Benita Levine is up next. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I-24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
On today's program, more than 170 Hezbollah rockets are fired at northern Israel. The IDF targets terror sites in the Dahya district of Beirut, and disturbing reports emerge of an alleged leak of Pentagon documents detailing Israeli plans for a retaliatory strike on Iran. Israel vows Iran will pay for the Hezbollah attack on Benjamin Netanyahu's private home on Saturday. The Prime Minister wasn't home at the time. He is again also warning that anyone who tries to harm Israel's citizens will pay a heavy price. And with 101 hostages still held captive by terrorists in Gaza, a top businessman offers a $100,000 reward for the safe return of hostages from captivity by midnight on Wednesday. We speak to Daniel Birnbaum in studio. The rundown on I24 News. I'm Benita Levine, and we start with a fresh development. The IDF has just confirmed that one of its highest-ranked soldiers has been killed in fighting in northern Gaza. 41-year-old Colonel Ehsan Dahsa, the commander of the 401st Brigade, killed 380 days into the war, a war started by Hamas on the 7th of October. Meanwhile, across the northern front on this day, Hezbollah has today launched more than 170 rockets towards Israel, triggering sirens in the western and upper Galilee, as well as Haifa and surrounds. And in the Lebanese capital, Israeli fighter jets striking a command center belonging to Hezbollah's intelligence division and an underground weapons manufacturing site in Beirut. U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein is expected in the region on Monday. He's been here multiple times throughout the war, trying to quell tensions as Hezbollah shows its solidarity with Hamas in Gaza. More in this report by our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran.
Non-stop sirens blared across northern Israel throughout Sunday. Hezbollah launched more than 100 rockets, including drones, at communities and military posts as the Lebanese terror group continues to expand its range of fire. There were no direct injuries from the attacks, but numerous wildfires spread around the communities.
We are in a daily war. This reality has been going for a year, but over the past week, we have seen the barrages intensify. The front line is expanding further south and now includes Acre.
Meanwhile, the IDF continued striking dozens of Hezbollah sites and operatives across Lebanon. The Air Force is back striking the capital, with the IDF saying it hit a command center of Hezbollah's intelligence headquarters and an underground weapons workshop. Visiting troops on the northern border, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Hezbollah's frontline fortifications are crumbling.
We are shifting from a situation of defeating the enemy in all the frontline villages to a situation of destruction, blowing up its tunnels and ammunition depots. We are dismantling Hezbollah. The results are very clear in the places where Hezbollah waited and prepared itself in order to raid into the border settlements. There are now IDF soldiers.
Hezbollah's deputy chief and de facto leader, Naim Qassem, has reportedly fled Lebanon 2 weeks ago, fearing an Israeli assassination. An Emirati news site cited an Iranian source saying Qassem fled to Tehran alongside Iran's foreign minister following his visit to Lebanon earlier this month. Meanwhile, the United States reportedly conveyed to Tehran via Iraqi mediators a message calling for calm in the Middle East and to stop supporting tensions in Lebanon.
There's an opportunity, in my view, and my colleagues agree, that we can probably deal with Israel and Iran in a way that ends the conflict for a while.
Say that again?
It ends the conflict. In other words, it stops the back and forth. We think that there's a possibility of working for a ceasefire in Lebanon.
To that end, U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein will arrive in Lebanon on Monday for another go at diplomacy, hoping that with Nasrallah out of the way, Lebanon can agree to a settlement that Hezbollah previously blocked.
And now for the latest on the ground, we go live to our correspondent, Robert Swift. He joins us from Kiryat Shmona in northern Israel. And Rob, more than 170 rockets launched at the north today, red alert sirens sounding in Haifa and surrounds. And just moments ago in Kiryat Shmona, once again, that's where you are. What is the latest? What can you tell us?
That's right. I think that figure is probably now closer to 200 since the number of launches that have taken place since that figure went out. It's probably back up again. Like you said, a launch here just a few minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, had us running to the bomb shelter where a collection of soldiers and a few civilians that still remain here in Kiryat Shmona gathered temporarily inside the shelter, waiting a couple of minutes until the all clear was given. That is run-of-the-mill today. There have been, I think, by my count, about 24 different cross-border attacks in the form of rocket barrages and drone infiltrations. Some of these, around about 4, have been on a larger scale barrages, including twice against Haifa. But for the most part, they're like the attack that we just saw a few minutes ago. Just small-scale barrages. You might have heard that boom there. That's outgoing IDF artillery. A reminder that the combat is taking place just a few kilometres from where we're standing in southern Lebanon as we speak.
And talking of that response, the IDF confirming it struck in Beirut's Dahia district earlier, targeting Hezbollah intelligence command centres and underground arms production sites. Tell us more. What is confirmed?
That's right. So the IDF believe that they killed 3 commanders in that strike. One of them was responsible for Hezbollah's southern front, which would be involved in the combat taking place here. The other 2 commanders, one of them was a communications specialist, it's understood, as well as the other being a weapons manufacturer. These 2 latter commanders, it's hoped that by eliminating them, this will degrade Hezbollah's ability to continue fighting against the IDF and make the combat here on the ground in the south of Lebanon, make it that much easier for the IDF going forward.
You stay safe. Thank you so much for now. Correspondent Robert Swift, live from Kiryat Shmona in northern Israel. Thank you, Rob. And now for more. It's a pleasure to welcome to studio Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot, former military secretary to 3 ministers of defense and the former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories in the IDF, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseran. Gentlemen, thank you so much, both of you, for being here. Much on the go in southern Lebanon, in northern Israel, in Gaza and in Iran. Much to cover. We will get to it all. But Eitan, I want to start with you in this report out of Rob, our colleague, about the tensions across the northern front. Much on the go. Your insights.
I think that the situation now in the north is moving in 2 directions. First of all, I might say that in the south of Lebanon, it depends on Israel by itself completely. And the decision is to put to the side the decision for 1701. It's not connected anymore to the reality, because what happened in the last 20 years, how Hezbollah has been built all the structure up the ground and under the ground and prepare themselves to make operation against Israeli civilians, like what happened the 7th of October. So the reality is that the first strip is coming towards, I think, the final activities that Israel destroyed. All these villages that were used, it was covered, many posts of Hezbollah, and destroying all the structure there. It means that we are moving to the almost half or a little bit less than the area in the south of Lebanon before coming to the area of Litani. What does it mean? It means that the new clear points of Israel in this area is to take responsibility to prevent any kind of returning of terrorism and terrorists, and to build again this structure until will be agreement. And this is the second issue. While Israel is striking Dahia, Beirut, Baka in the east side of the Lebanese, and also very close to Mar Jayun and that area, it destroying all the structure of Hezbollah. It means that what is built in Lebanon should be something like 1559, the decision that will bring Lebanon to another opportunity and chance to be really independent country.
And talking about those potential opportunities, Amos Hochstein, the U.S. Special Envoy Ariel Osaran, arrives once again in the region tomorrow. He's been here umpteen times during the war. What is he going to do this time to seriously quell tensions?
So I think he's going to try what didn't work in the past, but Lebanon of today is not the same Lebanon of just over 2 months ago, with the shadow of Nasrallah really looming over all decision-making in Lebanon. You hear since Nasrallah left the stage, you hear Lebanese politicians more, more forceful, more assertive in their rhetoric about the importance of maintaining Lebanese sovereignty. And to that note, Hezbollah's strongest ally, political ally, one of the 3 main political leaders in Lebanon, Nabih Berri, the parliament speaker, telling Al Arabiya, Saudi TV today, just a short while ago, that Hochstein's visit to Lebanon tomorrow is America's last chance to get to reach a deal before the election in the United States. He denied claims that Iran is obstructing any kind of solution for Lebanon, and saying that there is a rare consensus to adhere or to fully implement UN Resolution 1701. Now, the tunnel visuals that we're seeing right now, this is from one of the latest IDF exposures along the border with Israel. You know, as we heard Yoav Galan say, every border village that is along the Israel-Lebanon border on the Lebanese side has been converted by Hezbollah to a terror military compound. These are tunnels that are dug under schools, under residential homes, and these are the threats that Israeli forces on the ground are dismantling, but also why we see Hezbollah's political allies in Lebanon and Iran urging for a swift ceasefire, because these strategic tools that have been set in place for years by Hezbollah, they're being dismantled one by one. And so Israel wants to get rid of the immediate threat along the border before a diplomatic solution. Hezbollah and Iran trying to cut their losses and aiming for what they call a full implementation of 1701 that requires Hezbollah to leave the area. 1559 that Eitan talked about, that calls for the complete disarmament of Hezbollah. That's even less likely, in my opinion.
Eitan.
One remark shortly, besides what Ariel briefed in a very large way. I think that Amos Hochstein will find that the refusal and the self-confidence that were set to him by the Lebanese in the past under Hezbollah and Iran has been moved to the side. The only thing that Iran agreed now with the United States is to find solution for a ceasefire, because Iran is aware that it comes to an own border, an own country, instead of Hezbollah and Hamas themselves. So it's opportunity. Maybe it will take time after the elections, but also the Lebanese themselves understand this is not the American last chance before the election. This is their last chance before will come maybe someone else, and their life will be under much more pressure by the new president from the United States.
When one looks at the images of those tunnels in southern Lebanon, it reminds one, of course, of the tunnels that shocked many in this region in Gaza throughout this war. One has to ask the question, who paid for those tunnels and how long did it take to build this infrastructure you're looking at on your screen right now? Gentlemen, that brings me to my next point as we change our focus to Gaza itself. And as we started this broadcast, the confirmation by the IDF that one of its highest-ranked soldiers has been killed in fighting in Gaza, 41-year-old Colonel Ehsan Darsa, the commander of the 401st Brigade. A devastating blow. Condolences, of course, to his family, his community. Eitan, the significance of this kind of update, tragic indeed.
First of all, I join your condolences to his family. And this is the way the Israeli commanders are fighting. They are on the front, and they are leading their forces. Colonel Darsa was in the front of his soldiers for many months inside the Gaza Strip. But it shows you that the fighting in Gaza now in the north part is coming to a very strong, difficult stage, while we are pushing and trying to do two things. First of all, to move and to divide between civilians to the terrorists. We are now about hundreds or maybe some small number of thousands that are there, in order to break and to keep the north part of Gaza as the main, I think, point for Israel for the future. What is the coming future? As we discussed also Lebanon, we should know that after the thing that Sinwar has been passed away and moved from this earth, the opportunity for a short time, the gate that has been opened, is an open to fulfill the Israeli main goal now in Gaza, is the release of 101 hostages that are there, in order even to give up some others. But we can do it due what we are doing in the military things. And that shows you another thing. The connection and the blood connecting between Israel and the Druze together in this country is something that you cannot cut. You see how it's working like one country, one people that are doing it with all their heart, are giving themselves to defend this country. And I was commander of some Druze soldiers and commanders, and what I have to do is to salute to Daksa and to this community that is a major part on the IDF activities all over the areas in the borders.
One community, one nation, indeed. And talking about that fighting in northern Gaza, reports overnight of a fatal strike on Beit Lahia. Israel says it's investigating. The health ministry in Gaza, Ariel Osaran, saying it's one of the highest death tolls reported for months. This isn't the first time that there are conflicting reports about what happened. Tell us what is known so far.
Yeah, this is another one of those sites that that Hamas has taken over civilian infrastructure and turned it into a command center. The IDF, as it has continuously throughout the war, saying that it has it notified the residents of this area prior to the strike, but it shows once again the cynical use by Hamas of this sensitive infrastructure that are supposed to be protected by international law, but the moment Hamas takes over and uses them to launch attacks against Israel and often attack Israeli forces from these sites per se, then unfortunately these protections are lost. And once again, the international community gets an example as to how Hamas is using the civilian population of Gaza as human shields.
Gentlemen, stay with us as we turn to one of the biggest developments out of Gaza throughout this war. The Israeli military has released footage said to show Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar and his family fleeing to an underground bunker in the hours before the October 7th terror onslaught on Israel. The IDF making the footage public on Saturday, showing how the terror leader was preoccupied with his own survival rather than the needs of the Gazan people. More in this report by our Jody Natilovitz.
A man rushes quickly through a dark tunnel system, followed closely behind by a woman and children. For hours moving back and forth through the tunnel, carrying various supplies needed for a long stay, including mattresses, water bottles, pillows, food, and even a plasma television. CCTV captured the moment, dated October 6, 2023, the night before Hamas would launch the deadliest assault on Jews since the Holocaust. The man in the footage? The now slain Yahya Sinwar, known as the architect of the October 7th attack on Israel. The video, apparently recovered several months ago, was released by the IDF amid attempts by some Hamas supporters to portray the footage of Sinwar throwing a stick at a surveillance drone in his dying moments as evidence of a brave leader who fought to the very end.
Even on the evening before the brutal massacre, Sinwar was preoccupied with his survival and that of his family, building his escape route.
He was doing that all night alone with his family in order to keep his position classified. It was all happening in Khan Yunis.
According to IDF intelligence, since October 7th, Sinwar spent most of his time in Gaza's underground tunnel systems, believed to be a total length of about 700 kilometers. emerging only to escape, accompanied by bodyguards and with documents, certificates, weapons, and money. For the first few weeks, Sinwar hid in Gaza City in a compound under Shifa Hospital. Hagari added that in February, the IDF reached the underground fortress Sinwar had built in Khan Yunis, but he had fled shortly before, leaving behind millions of shekels in cash. By August, more intelligence footage and circumstantial evidence collected suggested that Sinwar could be in the Tel Sultan neighborhood of Rafah. Intelligence officers observed people walking around with their faces covered, sometimes accompanied by guards. They believed they might have been senior Hamas figures or abductees. On August 27th, Israeli hostage Farhan Qadi was located in the area. On August 31st, the bodies of 6 murdered hostages were recovered from a tunnel in the same area.
IDF operations in Khan Yunis forced Sinwar to flee to Rafah. Last month, Sinwar's DNA was found on a piece of tissue he used. A few hundred meters from a tunnel where 6 Israeli hostages were brutally executed in Tel Sultan in Rafah. Then, Sinwar fled yet again.
At the end of September, a letter to the Hamas leaders in Qatar from Gaza said that they were committed to the ceasefire and hostage deal made in July, this appearing to be Sinwar's final message to his men prior to his assassination. It is not clear why Sinwar came above ground, but according to intelligence sources, he may have realized he was being sought underground and chose to hide in one of Tel Sultan's many identical buildings instead. The IDF had also been conducting more ambushes in tunnels in the Rafah region in recent weeks, even injecting them with gas, making breathing impossible. Based on all the data gathered by Israeli and American intelligence agencies, Sinwar led Hamas for at least the first 6 months of the war while staying underground with his family, and that IDF troops came close to him several times, but always arriving shortly after he managed to escape.
Killing Sinwar is the result of a year of operational and intelligence efforts to bring him and other Hamas leaders to justice.
So for more insight, Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot, the significance of this moment in the war, the elimination, finally, after more than a year, of Yahya Sinwar, the way he managed to evade Israeli troops for all that time, and what this all means for the hostages.
I want to emphasize a few points. First of all, this is the timing that the Israeli Prime Minister, because he is the decision, taking the decisions, has to calculate his decision very deeply in order to get or to achieve one of the main goals, not even for the war, for the Israeli future, about how Israel has to behave and to defend its civilians, is to make now the efforts and to find a way to receive back all the 101 hostages and giving back to those who will be in Gaza in a different way. I think it has to be with taking or bringing Egypt especially to a way that Egypt will fulfill a very important task, not even by the messages, and also be maybe inside Gaza, because the question, who is now the main leadership for Hamas? If we are making a delay in such a process, we can find ourselves without the hostages. About Sinwar, 2 remarks. First of all, what was brought by Israel shows that Sinwar was a guy who went down to the tunnels immediately 1 day before he made this kind of murder and bloodshed inside Israel. And the way he threw the stick, it's not an hero. It's the last 2-3 days that he went up in order to bring himself to a way to escape from Israeli. And the last, but the main sensitive is, just think about the 6 hostages that were kept nearby Sinwar and the way they were killed, and they fight for their life, how they succeed to survive in such a place for a few months and bring themselves to the way they could be released. And I'm sure that Sinwar was a part of the decision that gave those kind of guards the option to kill them by the way that it was built as a very cruel murderer. And this is the way that this is our enemy, And this is a continuating for what has started on the 7th of October, and we have to bring them back home.
One cannot imagine what those hostages close to Yahya Sinwar for all that time had to endure, difficult to comprehend. It begs the question, first of all, many suggesting Hamas might be emboldened by the elimination of Yahya Sinwar, who is on the cards to take over, not something one would be racing to do, given what happens to many of the terror leaders these days.
Yeah, I don't think that this is the source of inspiration that Hamas is lacking, that it needs right now. At the end of the day, Hamas as a military organization has been dismantled. It's now down to guerrilla warfare, and it is operating each geographical area pretty much on its own. It's not clear if Sinwar, who was found in technical gear, was part of the fighting force because they were so short of fighters, or it was just part of his masquerade to appear as if he is part of the the Hamas so-called resistance. But if we're looking at the main names that have been touted so far, we have Khaled Mashal, the former leader of Hamas, and he's the head of Hamas abroad. You have Khalil al-Haya, he was Sinwar's deputy. Then there's Muhammad Sinwar, Sinwar's brother, who is the de facto military leader and managing the show in Gaza. But I do want to throw in another name that hasn't been mentioned as much, and that's Muhammad Ismail Darwish. He's the head of the Shura Council of Hamas. Now, why am I mentioning him? Because the last two diplomatic meetings with the Iranian foreign minister and Turkish foreign minister, he's the one who led the Hamas delegations, not Khalil al-Haya, who was sitting right next to him.
One can imagine the secrecy around that appointment. We wait to see how it all unfolds. Gentlemen, stay with us. Much more to discuss after the break. Stay tuned.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
to the rundown. Our coverage continues. 101 hostages remain in captivity in Gaza, as we've been discussing here in studio. Still no clarity as to how many of them are alive. Most of the hostages were abducted during the Hamas terror rampage on the 7th of October. Benjamin Netanyahu has called on the residents of Gaza to return hostages to Israel following the assassination of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. The Prime Minister is promising that Israel would allow those who do so to leave the Gaza Strip safely. And then the former CEO of SodaStream International, Daniel Birnbaum, made this offer in an effort to secure the safe return of Israeli hostages held in captivity now for 380 days. Let's take a listen.
This is a message for the good people in Gaza. I have an offer for you. My name is Daniel Birnbaum, and I was CEO and chairman of SodaStream International, a NASDAQ-traded company that was acquired by PepsiCo. This year was a terrible year. It's time to wrap things up. It's time to move on. A few days ago, Benjamin Netanyahu promised free passage and immunity to anyone who delivers an Israeli prisoner to Israel. I would like to add to that a financial reward. Anyone who delivers from Gaza a living Israeli prisoner will receive $100,000. That would be paid either by cash or by Bitcoin, as you prefer. Don't wait. This offer is valid until Wednesday midnight, October 24th. Just a few days. Reach out to this number by Telegram or by WhatsApp in confidence, and I'll make the appropriate connections to assure your free passage and reward money. So don't wait. It's time for you to take control of your life, to build a future for yourself, for your family, and for your community. Do it today.
And now we welcome to studio the former CEO of SodaStream International, Daniel Birnbaum. Thank you so much for being here. It's time to wrap things up. Your words, I think the whole nation feels the exact same. We've been talking about the nation waiting for word on 101 hostages. So many people want to try and help in some way. Talk us through your thinking, your initiative here.
Yeah, we've all been waiting. It's been a long time, but a Jew is obligated to take a leap of action rather than a leap of faith. And we've had enough waiting and all kinds of expectations and promises and negotiations and all kinds of stuff. And I respect it. It's okay, and that can continue. But I think with Sinwar's departure from our earth, there's an opportunity to change the game a little bit and to try something else. I think there might be mayhem going on in the tunnels right now. We know that the 6 wonderful who were killed about 3 weeks ago were killed, they were murdered because their guards freaked out. They thought the Israeli soldiers are coming, so they shot them. And we don't want that to happen when there's no leadership, or maybe there is a potential leadership gap. It's got to be scary for Hamas folks in those tunnels. Their friends are getting killed. Their families, they don't know what's going on. They themselves might got to be hungry. They've been in the dark for a long time. They don't know. They're afraid. So here maybe there's a lifeline for them. And Benjamin Netanyahu did it himself. I didn't create this. He made the offer, free passage, immunity. I just added the third link, the third leg of this offer, and add money a little bit to make them, to enable them to build a life.
Did you do it in conjunction with authorities? You say you're adding on to that offer from Benjamin Netanyahu. Are you working together, for want of a better way of describing it?
I didn't ask for permission, but I'm not asking for forgiveness, because this offer makes perfect sense. You can't really argue that much about it unless you're thinking in a skewed manner, in my opinion. There's no reason not to try it. The amount is not so crazy that we're going to have everyone getting kidnapped in Israel for future ransom. There could be an opportunity right now in Gaza with the leadership challenge that they have to break things up, to shake things up a little bit. There's the Hamulot there, those tribes, the mafia, whatever they're called, and there's Hamas. And these guys are interacting with each other through a power struggle. And part of that power struggle is about money. Okay, maybe we can deepen the rift and hopefully get some hostages alive out of Gaza. That's my dream. I hope I will go bankrupt from this offer.
$100,000 to any person who returns living hostages. Right. Your message has been out for a bit now. What kind of reaction so far?
It's been out for about 24 hours. I got probably more than 100 messages. Last I checked, and it's piling up right now. And what I'm doing is I'm obviously there's some that are just curses and pornography and threats, but whatever is potentially legitimate Since I'm not a security expert, I have no authority, I pass them on to the government and have my contact person over there, and they take it from there.
Well, talking about security experts, we have one in studio right now, so I'm going to pick the brain of Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot. Your thoughts on this highly unusual strategy? Could it work?
I think that first above all, it shows you what is the way and how it is seen the unity in Israel and how it's important to bring back people life home. And I think that Daniel understands more than many people that are in the government the necessary way to bring them immediately. And we have now a gate that can be closed in a few days, and we will not find any kind of solution because the chaos that can be in Gaza. Secondly, is an option that gives people the option for the future. It's not enough to pass without being arrested or something like this. It gave them the opportunity to build a new life. But this is, in my opinion, a way of the second circle. It gives people in some places, and in my opinion, will be some people that can help, and it depends on the Israel intelligence, and those can take the messages and to see who is reality, and can be surprises also that the answers will be in different way, not even by phone. But secondly, it brings us to the main point. The main point is Benjamin Netanyahu. Besides his declaration yesterday, he should take, I may say, a very courage and brave decisions. In these circumstances, it has to be changed, the way of thinking, the way of giving up for what, and bring them completely, the 101 people, back home, because this is the real future for the continuing of the Israeli nation as we are, as we build, as we respect our people, as the duty of the country. And what has been done by Daniel, it's something like a private, but it has a lot of weight to show what is the way that the Israeli civilians themselves are thinking and how to hug their brothers everywhere, in all places they will be in the world, in trouble or problem.
And Daniel, have other business people or entrepreneurs wanted to join forces, so to speak, get on board, offer cash rewards, offer Bitcoin? What has the response been within the business echelon, so to speak?
Eitan made a point. We've been looking for ways to help this cause for a year, and it's been so frustrating. There hasn't been a way other than going to a demonstration, which you don't even know is helping or hurting. And finally, it seems like there might be a window. There might be something here that we can do. And that sense, that feeling has been spread among business people, not only in Israel, but also internationally. I've had at least 20 people who have the wealth who want to join this initiative starting tomorrow or Wednesday. And I like that, because not because it'll save me money, and I don't want to raise the price, but because it'll give credence to the proposal for Hamas. Because Hamas doesn't know who I am, and they don't trust Benjamin Netanyahu. Will I see the money? But they will trust big names that they know from the international business community. So I like that, and that's where we're going. And hopefully we'll be able to create the offer that they cannot refuse.
We certainly will be following up to see how it all unfolds. Daniel Birnbaum, the former CEO of SodaStream International, thank you so much for being here in studio. Thanks for being part of the rundown. Now, reports of a major U.S. intelligence security breach. 2 American documents detailing Israel's movements in preparation for its retaliatory strike on Iran have been leaked. Iran is bracing for a response after the Islamic Republic launched that major missile attack on Israel on the 1st of October. The documents were published in the anti-Israel Telegram account Middle East Spectator, reportedly raising concerns in the U.S. and in Israel too. Senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has more in this report.
It's been 20 days since Iran launched some 200 missiles into Israel, and since Israel vowed to retaliate. Now, 2 U.S. intelligence documents on Israel's preparations for the response have been leaked online in an apparent major security breach. The American documents detail measures taken in the last week by the Israeli Air Force, including the transfer of weapons, a large exercise involving intelligence planes, and drone units intended to attack Iran. The U.S. has not commented on the alleged leak, but has also not disputed the authenticity of the documents. If true, the papers indicate the U.S. is keeping a close eye and potentially spying on its ally. On Friday, President Joe Biden confirmed that the Americans are informed of Israel's movements.
Do you have a good understanding right now what Israel is going to do in response to Iran's October 1st attacks and when they will actually respond to Iran?
Yes and yes.
Can you tell us?
No and no.
Iran's foreign minister tweeted with a picture of President Biden that anyone with knowledge about Israel's expected attack must be held accountable.
Due to the expansionist policies of the occupying regime, the region has turned into a powder keg, and its explosion could endanger not only the peace and security of the region, but also the entire world. The possibility of war in the region remains a serious concern, and no one in the region, except for the Zionist regime, desires this situation.
On Saturday, a drone attack launched by the Iranian proxy Hezbollah targeted Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's home in northern Israel. Washington, seeking to avoid any further escalation, has called for Israel to limit the scope of its retaliation against Iran and not to strike Iran's nuclear or oil facilities. Meanwhile, the U.S. is sending an advanced air defense battery and around 100 troops to Israel to protect the country in case of another Iranian attack.
Now for the latest, we go live to correspondent Zach Anders. He joins us from outside Israeli Defense Headquarters in Tel Aviv. And Zach, the Israeli Security Cabinet meeting right now, believed to be discussing plans for a possible strike on Iran. What is the latest there? What can you tell us?
I just read a message that said news soon, and I really don't know what to make of that other than perhaps we could see some movement tonight. And this is coming from someone in the know. Now, the IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari is set to give a statement here shortly, any moment. And it's assumed that some of the discussion that's taking shape behind us here in the Kyria, this Security Cabinet meeting, which we're hearing is still taking place inside the Kyria with the defense apparatus and the Prime Minister, that potentially some form of statement or some public messaging could come later tonight, although at the same time we had received earlier messages that the IDF spokesperson Hagari's statement is going to be regarding Hezbollah. So really can't make heads or tails of what is taking place, right, because this is behind closed doors. But what we do know is that this is a gathering of all of the different elements of the Israeli government that would need to sign off on final or give final approval, roughly, in a sense, to provide a retaliatory strike plan on Iran. So presuming that that is at the top of the agenda, potentially tonight a decision could be made. If it hasn't been made already, we're really, and by design, operating in the dark. The regular victims and sources that we try and pry information out of, it is very radio silent right now, of course, and it has been relatively that way for the last 2 weeks,
right,
knowing that the Israeli government attempting to keep this on lock.
One can understand why, especially when you hear about that disturbing leak, of course, reports of this major U.S. intelligence security breach, these documents outlining Israel's possible next moves. What more is known on that front? What is confirmed?
Well, the most shocking element here is that it was leaked at all and that this is a U.S. document. Now, do we know where the leak comes from? No. And right now, the general interest is flocking towards it came out of the U.S. This is going to be a very long investigation, and likely someone is going to jail, or multiple people are going to jail. It reminds me of when a National Guardsman in Massachusetts leaked information last year. He's in prison. He's going to be in prison for a long time. This is a very unusual thing for leaks to come out of the U.S. government like this, the military. But as I've reviewed now these leaked documents, and the U.S. has shifted a bit of their weight behind it in their public admissions that does prove that these documents are authentic. But in reviewing the documents, it's nothing earth-shattering. It doesn't necessarily give any of the enemies in this axis of resistance across the Middle East any vital information that they couldn't probably pry out of their own networks or get based on their own satellite images, because that's what this leaked document is a review of the satellite spaces. But perhaps one of the more interesting elements here is that it does go in depth on what was or wasn't damaged at a specific airbase, and it does disprove the Iranian claims that they had hit and destroyed the F-35 aircraft, the most advanced fighter jets. That is not what we're seeing in these leaked documents about what spaces, these hangars that were damaged. Again, some of the information we were reporting on the night of the Iranian attack was the fact that the Israeli Air Force, most of those jets were in the air as those ballistic missiles were incoming. They were off the ground so that they wouldn't be hit or potential targets on the ground.
Thank you so much. The mystery continues. Many questions remain. Correspondent Zach Anders, live from Tel Aviv. Appreciate the update. And now for more insight on exactly this, we welcome Jason Brodsky, Policy Director at United Against Nuclear Iran. He joins us from Washington. So thank you very much for being with us. As always, let's start with this very worrying leak of U.S. intelligence. And as I come to you, Daniel Hagari is about to speak. Stand by.
Today, in a clash with terrorists in Northern Gaza and Jabalia, the brigade commander of the 401st Brigade, Ahsan Daksa, died, and a battalion commander was injured, and 2 additional soldiers were mildly wounded. The soldiers entered the area in tanks and exited them to observe the area. During this exit from the tanks, they suffered an explosion in the tank. The commanders of the 401st Brigade are fighting in Gaza since day one and led the entry to Northern Gaza, continued to Rafah, and now into Jabalia. Ahsan was an excellent commander, officer, and a modest commander. He served in a long line of positions in the armored brigades, and he received a Medal of Honor for his fighting in the Second Lebanese War. On October 7th, he was called up to the communities surrounding the Gaza Strip. He received command over the 401st Brigade just a few months ago. He led the fighting in the Tel Sultan neighborhood and commanded the forces that dismantled the local battalion and led to the killing of many terrorists and prevented the escape of Sinwar until he was eliminated. The forces continued to operate in Jabalia. Ahsan led the forces and died when he was leading his forces. He was 41 years old. He left behind a wife and 3 children. In the last hours, Israeli IDF officials notified his family in Dayat and Carmel. We joined the family and send our condolences. Today we got another reminder of the difficult, heavy costs of this war. We salute the fallen and the families who bear the heavy toll of this war, and we offer our assistance in any way we can to alleviate the despair. The 401st Brigade will continue to fight and continue to lead the offense in Gaza. In Ahsan Daksa's place was another commander was put in his place. Over the past few hours, numerous projectiles were launched at Israel. And in the coming hours, we are going to issue an evacuation warning to Lebanese in Beirut and other areas to leave areas that are adjacent to Hezbollah terror sites. I reiterate, anyone who will be found near these sites that are intended to fund Hezbollah's terror activity, we implore them to leave the area immediately. We, in the coming hours, are expected to target numerous sites. In the coming days, we will expose how Iran funds Hezbollah's terror activity through the use of civilian organizations and agencies as the cover. We will strike them overnight, and we will update on the results of those strikes in the coming days.
רצה על דין פישר, חדשות 12, שאלה בנוגע לתוכניות לתקיפה באיראן. האם התוכנית בעצם לתקיפה באיראן מתעכבת בעקבות ההדלפה מהפנטגון על התוכניות הישראליות, והאם ביקשתם הסברים מהאמריקנים איך קורה דבר כזה? האם הממשל מדליף פרטים מבצעיים נגד ישראל?
A question regarding the leak of information, and is there a known leak? We will strike anywhere that we need to strike where there is a threat against Israel. Here, on this stage, this is not the place to disclose that information. The political echelon will decide, and we will act when we are aware and when we are asked to. Regarding the issue of the United States, and in the IDF we work again reciprocally with CENTCOM. We share information throughout the entire war. We've acted in this way, and we will continue to act that way. I will not respond to such questions. Khan News.
IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari there taking questions after that briefing, paying tribute to Colonel Ehsan Dahsa at the start of this broadcast. We discussed how the 41-year-old colonel had been killed in Northern Gaza defending this country. We are finding out that he is survived by his wife and 3 children. Eitan Dangot.
Yes, it's a tragedy for another family in Israel. And this is the price that the Israeli society is paying. But I think that it's also raising the necessary way to decide in the circumstances that we have the opportunities by achievements that the IDF brought to the political level, how to try to put a new agreement based on fulfill the 2 main goals. First of all is the release of the hostages. The second is to bring back the people in the north, and I think in this way, I want to pay your attention. I think it's the first time that we see the Israeli spokesman by himself standing and warning and telling the Lebanese to move away from some places that will be strike in the coming hours. It means that Israel made now a declaration, the IDF, that the way it's continue its offensive activities in Lebanon will be increased. And this is a message to Hezbollah and to Iran under the visit of Hochstein, that they will find opportunity to a ceasefire agreement, but Israel will not withdraw from the offensive way till we achieve things that will fulfill the peace of the Israelis to live in the north.
And very clear, Ariel, according to Daniel Hagari there, that people need to vacate from particular areas inside Gaza. This fighting is going to continue.
Yeah, so before that, I just want to, the part that was missed in the translation was that Dahsa will be replaced by Colonel Meir Biderman, the deputy commander of the 162nd Brigade. Now, regarding Hagari's announcement that Israel is now going after the money route. Follow the money, that's what Israel is doing now, and he's projecting this in advance. I agree with Eitan. This is not the first time that they've done it, but it is very rare that the IDF gives such prior warning on such a big stage to the residents of Beirut. I think that is part of the reason, because you say this is a message to Iran and Hezbollah. I think this is also a message to the United States that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said in his conversations with his Israeli counterpart Yoav Gallant that they've asked the Israelis to scale back their strikes in Beirut. We have seen that in recent days, but over the weekend these resumed, and now with the projection of a wide-scale raid in Beirut, it appears that Israel is saying to the Americans, we hear you, but we have our own targets that we need to go on after. So Israel targeting now the money route for Hezbollah, not only targeting the sites, but Hagari promising to expose these widespread financial connections. And I think when the public is exposed, they will be surprised as to how far-reaching Hezbollah's financial infrastructure is. This is not only cross borders, but cross continents. And this is what Israel's going after right now, announcing that it's going after the pocket, the money route of Hezbollah.
And that all unfolding in Beirut and surrounds, not to mention developments in Gaza. And we only have 30 seconds left. Eitan Dangot, your thoughts about the likely response that Israel is considering right now in terms of hitting back at Iran. Briefly, please.
I think that we should wait. We should not get any kind of assessment what will be the targets. It's the business of the government and also the military wing. But one thing is clear, that Israel will react. It's necessary to do it. But if will be any kind of development of bringing the hostages, I think we have to take it on account.
What is clear, the hostages need to be brought back home. Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot, Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran, thank you both as always. And that is a wrap for now. I'm Benita Levine. Stay tuned. This is The Rundown.